Welcome back. Let's go back to one of our top stories, which is an undercover officer accusing Police Minister on special leave Senzo Mchunu of trying to influence his testimony before the Madlanga Commission. Referred to only as Witness E, the officer, who is under witness protection, says he received a high number of calls from Mchunu when the commission was established. For more on this, we are joined by Unisa Political Sciences Professor Dirk Kotzé and crime expert Professor Jacob Mofokeng. You can also give us a call on 010-594-6010 or send us a WhatsApp on 072-110-5584. A very good evening to both of you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. Prof. Mofokeng, perhaps maybe let's just start with you and just looking based on the testimonies that we heard today. How would you evaluate this alleged conduct of Minister Mchunu in relation to the investigation into political interference?
Well, good evening, Katlego. Good evening to Newzroom Afrika. Good evening to our viewers as well as Professor Kotzé. Well, Witness E, who is an undercover officer, provided a statement that portrays quite significant, potentially improper interference from high-level officials, regarding an investigation into KwaZulu-Natal security crisis and, Madlanga murder. So it is quite disturbing to show that Minister Mchunu, could have really interfered, and calling this particular Witness E, even though he's now on the witness protection, program. So he said though he was, excited to receive such, telephone conversation from the minister, then he was just been, issued with a new phone, with a new number, then also highlighting the lack of, protection even for those that actually are supposed to be whistleblowers that are supposed to be kept in that kind of program. So, but he did admitted to lying to the Minister Mchunu based on the pressure as well as the number of calls of which he was using different, phones or even the methods of calling, moving away from direct lines into WhatsApp calls, as a way that he cannot be able to detect it, agreeing to draft a statement of which, Minister Mchunu was giving him quite a pressure, for him to draft such statements so that he can forward it to, to his lawyers, in preparation to the testimony that he provided today, to probably give falsifies, information under oath to the Madlanga Commission. It really gives us quite a disturbing, to say that someone can fight at that particular cause. Of course, trying to clear his name, but it remains to be tested, because then at the end of the day, then he will have to be called back to be able to answer to this, allegations that were brought, against him. So we also heard that, Witness E claimed that Minister Mchunu instructed him, with that particular, falsehood, information. So we are looking forward then, for tomorrow to be able to understand actually who will be the next, witness, and when there will be corroboration to this. But we also see how he is probably, obsessed with trying to find General Khumalo to be implicated. So then the question is, if then he's a minister of police that is expected to work with the police commissioner, where he will have directed also the witness not to send emails to, general, the police minister. So meaning that in his portfolio, in his powers, then he was not really intending to work with the police commissioner to be able to address this particular issue. It shows as well as what witnesses already provided. Remember, even General Masimola made submission to the commission to say whoever comes as a police commissioner, they don't, spend the entire term in the office, because there will be individuals elsewhere, that are trying to be able to sabotage. So it just shows indeed there is a political interference as well as, infiltration of external forces within the South African Police Service.
Right.
For the crime intelligence not to be able to act, it's also something that really points something that, we have a crime.
And it's quite concerning. I mean, Prof. Kotzé, maybe let's bring you in there with regards to what then was your overall assessment of the political implications of these accusations that have been made against the Minister of Coercion.
Yes, good evening. Yes, I think that is indeed so. I think this particular matter actually goes back to 2017. Now, we know that was the year also of the ANC's national conference, and Minister Mchunu was a candidate as a Secretary General for the ANC on the President Ramaphosa side. And it was about the political killings happening during that period. And the person who was killed ultimately in Msomi is a former ANC Secretary General of the ANC's Youth League. So it is highly politicized, this event, or this what happened in terms of this assassination. Many people want to suggest that it was part of the internal factionalism of the ANC just before the national conference also. And I'm speculating, but I think what the minister now wants to do is to try to avoid that he is implicated in that, and that he is even being suggested that he was to some extent involved in these political assassinations. Because crime intelligence ultimately, and that's the evidence of witness E, he himself was one of the persons in the crime intelligence that infiltrated this group that committed the assassination, and some of them were members of crime intelligence themselves. So it becomes a very complicated situation with very strong political undertones. And I think this is what the ministers try to avoid, to be implicated in these political dynamics around about 2017.
And how concerning is it, Prof. Kotzé? I mean, Prof. Mofokeng touched on the issue that the witnesses were saying that he was trying to implicate General Khumalo. So when you look at it from a perspective of the position that General Khumalo holds, also just his role within project managing the PKTT, and then having a minister that may have come in wanting to implicate him on something like this, what does this just tell us broadly with regards to the democraticness of such institutions?
Well, crime intelligence has been highly controversial, since the times of President Zuma, actually. And thereafter, it has not really, I would say, stabilized to the point where one can say they act in the way in which they are supposed to. The fact that we have now General Khumalo, who's the head of crime intelligence, that's been part of these political implications that's been made about him, and that, as you say, the minister tries to implicate him as being involved in the criminal components of it, is clearly a way of trying to either neutralize or even eliminate the role of crime intelligence. And the role that General Khumalo is playing now together with General Mkhwanazi, and that is of being the protagonist to some extent of the minister and the others like Kat Matlala and General Sabia. And that he therefore wants to undermine his credibility as a witness and what he is presenting to the Madlanga Commission and also to the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee, of presenting a case of saying, exposing what was the role of the different components of the police, as well as the minister, and then also specifically General Sabia.
Prof. Mofokeng, I mean, we've touched on that issue of the minister on special leave, wanting to know more, particularly about the cases of Sindiso Makaka and the ANC councillor Pendukani Mapida. What does this say to you, especially him wanting to know the specifics of those cases, as to why one of those cases is sitting with the PKTT? What sort of picture does this reflect for the minister?
Well, it shows that, well, he was just advancing the interests of his political party, then he was not really acting as a, a political, someone, public figure that has been put there to be able to ensure that, South Africans are safe and, be able to work with communities widely as well as service, providers, community structures. We are aware in terms of crime as well as what, organized crimes, including the Zamazamas, are doing. They are raining havoc in South Africa. But he was more obsessed with, defection of that particular individual within KwaZulu-Natal who was, commanding large number of followers. Then when he defected to, MK Party, then he made it his assignment together with other structures within that particular, area to, neglecting, the mandate that has been given, to be able to look for the entire interests of the, South African citizens. So it really puts, as well as, the recording that was actually played where the witness, it did indicate, the legalities for him to put that kind of recording to the public to say that, well, the default, settings that he put on his phone then eventually resulted in him, the phone being, recording him, of which then he's trying his level best, the minister, to be able to see him coming back to the office. But the office of which then, it can be argued based on what we are hearing, that he occupied that office only to advance the interests of, ANC, not really to work for the government, because and the government of the national unity. For him not to be able to consult with the police commissioner, probably then he doesn't trust them, or there was another interest for him to follow why the PKTT is performing in that way, and then in that particular case of an assassinated, comrade. So it shows that he's got very conflicted, interest in that particular portfolio that he's occupying, something that really is addressing, the lack of credibility from his side, as well as, the command of respect, as well as leadership, in that office that he's occupying. He's supposed to give direction, wherever he's needed, as well as to bring the people of South Africa into confidence that indeed he's the right person to be occupying that particular position. But what we are hearing also from, General, Gopal, it is that he's very interfering in the operations of the police. He's even overlooking and not following protocols in terms of people that actually supposed to be consulting to be able to understand the processes of certain cases and how the stations, are performing. So it really put him in a bad light to say that probably he might be advised wrong, or he might have a very bad ulterior motives, of not really representing, the office, as well as bringing, we can hear that the South African Police Service leadership is in crisis. He's supposed to come as a catalyst to be able to bring cohesion within the South African Police Service, but it seems like he's aiding, this bad fire to, putting a fuel to already the fire that is engulfing the South African Police Service.
Prof. Kotzé, Prof. Mofokeng speaks about Minister Mchunu advancing the interests of his party. Do you believe that these incidents may reflect more systemic issues within the ANC and the broader political spectrum?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to have an explicit answer for you. I think there are certainly, well, we all know, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, there has been a very much complicated ANC politics, different groups, different political provincial executives that were removed, the task team that have been implemented now. So the ANC for the last at least 10 years is in a very difficult and turbulent situation in KwaZulu-Natal. On top of that is whenever there's elections, either ANC or elections or national elections in terms of national or provincial or local elections, there's very often political assassinations that are taking place there. And that goes back almost to 1994, even before that. So I think and then at the same time, the Minister Mchunu is a former premier of the province. So he's intimately involved in, first of all, the ANC politics, then the politics of the province or the provincial executive, and then in the policing of it. And I think that is where, over time, we have been entangled in a situation which started to compromise it, and which now we are seeing is the product of where it's allegedly you have become involved in persons who used him, his political position, in order to promote their own interests, which to a large extent are criminal interests. And I think that this web that developed around him is causing him to be able to fight back in all different manners, including this now of trying to influence witnesses in order to save himself, politically speaking, but also just to be able to keep out of being charged and being imprisoned, maybe. That's the most extreme situation that can emerge. But in his position, it is all of these things are real. It's real options that does exist, and he is now in the process of self-preservation, of defending himself, of trying to avoid these options. And that is why I think many of some of his evidence that he presented in Parliament and at the Commission becomes now clear that they are contradictory, and that they are not necessarily there for providing the truth according to what he was supposed to present there.
It's going to certainly be quite interesting to hear what his responses are to some of these allegations of coercion. We are discussing the very first sitting of the Madlanga Commission that took place today for 2026 with our analysts. Do stay with us as we continue with this discussion. Welcome back. You're watching the late edition with me, Katlego Msomi, and we are wrapping up the day's Madlanga Commission that took place, the very first sitting for 2026. We are joined by Unisa Political Sciences Professor Dirk Kotzé, as well as the crime expert Professor Jacob Mofokeng. Remember, you can send us a WhatsApp on 072-110-5584, or you can give us a call on 010-594-6010. So some of you have already started sending through your opinions. We've got one from Mr. B saying, concerning the Madlanga Commission, what does it help to voice our opinion, because it's all a joke? Witnesses can bring proof, even videos or photos. Nothing, but nothing is going to happen to these criminals as long as the ANC is in power. And then Cobra says, hi, Katlego, witness E's testimony show that our justice system is compressed due to interference by politicians who seek to protect drug cartels. And then Fezi Linga says, good evening, my lady. In light of today's testimony and added to other matters already canvassed insofar as it implicates Mchunu, that President Ramaphosa has to date deemed it appropriate to persist with Mchunu as the minister, albeit on leave, thereby unnecessarily burdening the exhausted public purse, is quite bothering. It is untenable, it's grossly unreasonable. At the very least, his special leave ought to have been upgraded to a precautionary suspension, as legal consequences of each materiality vary. All right, and so those were your opinions with regards to the Madlanga Commission. Let's get back to our guests who are joining us there. Maybe just to touch on some of those WhatsApp messages sent by viewers. The very first one saying nothing, absolutely nothing will be done regardless of the evidence that comes through. Maybe Prof. Kotzé, you could take us through with regards to the impact of such commissions. I mean, really does it assist, especially when it comes to public trust in the action being taken? We saw that interim report being sent to the president at the end of the first half of the Madlanga Commission, quite late in the year last year.
Yes, I think, yes, the commissions of inquiry, judicial commissions, don't necessarily have a good reputation in terms of not the reporting that they have done by the commission itself, but the actions taken afterwards in response to that. I think there's a general belief that very little has been done, whether it's the Zondo Commission or the Morani Commission or several others. I think if we look at this particular situation, first of all, the terms of reference of the Madlanga Commission includes that they can refer a person if they believe there's sufficient evidence already for investigation and prosecution by the NPA, even before they've concluded their work. So that is indeed possible. What we have seen, I think, in terms of the consequences so far is, and some might say I'm trying to be too optimistic, but first of all, I think, practically speaking, it's the end of the political career of the Minister Mchunu. It's absolutely unlikely that he will return as minister, irrespective of the outcome of the Commission's report. That applies also to a very senior general in the police, General Sibiang. I think it's almost impossible for him to be able to return to his position in the police service. Then I think what we look at is, for example, those persons implicated like Kat Matlala, TK Molefe and others, they've been arrested. So in a sense, they have been taken out of circulation. And I think this is let's take, for example, Kat Matlala, the fact that he's now in Kokstad means that the ability of him to be able to make contact with the people, his networks, his syndicates, if you want to call that, has been broken. That network has been broken. There was serious interference now in the work of these criminal syndicates. What we are seeing is also at this stage a reduction in the number of the political killings. Now we are approaching this election time, and unfortunately, this is a time when political assassinations are taking place. So it will be interesting to see if there's a reduction in the form of in the number of political assassinations, especially in KwaZulu-Natal. So these are, for me, it's not necessarily that they've acted on the official results or outcome of the commission, but the mere existence of the commission have prompted a number of actions which I think in general are exceptionally important.
Most
On top
certainly.
of that is the fact that it is like other commissions, it's in the public eye. It's being broadcast on a daily basis. It means the public becomes informed about it. It's a point that I'm trying to make very often in interviews, is to say this is on its own. It's not measurable, but it is exceptionally important because it means that whether it is the police or politicians or others, they can't deny anymore that the police has been infiltrated by criminal syndicates.
Most
and that
certainly.
some serious responses are necessary. In the past, they simply denied it. Now it's impossible. I think these type of consequences are ultimately very important in changing the mindset as well as the actions that must be taken.
And you raise a very important point there, Prof, with regards to it being in the public eye and for active citizenry, for our very citizens to be able to take in this information and also put it out in a way that in how they digest it, it helps in the decisions that they make in so many other ways. We do have a caller on the line, Sanele in Mnambithe. Very good evening to you. What are your thoughts this evening?
Greetings, Swami, and greetings to your panelists tonight.
All right, Sanele, tell us, what do you have on your mind tonight?
What I'm having on my mind and a clarity to your panelists, there's only one thing there. I think whatever the witness E has testified upon today, I think we are putting a cage before the horse, and we are doing an injustice to the Madlanga Commission, because whatever that was said today, it is not being tested by the commission. And then we are not aware of any credibility of what was it said today, because I'm worried about the weight of the potential contradiction in as far as when the witness he admitted he's dishonest, then how credible can we say that he is not dishonest to us as the citizen too, by whatever that he was referring to, regardless of whatever WhatsApp calls and whatever statement he has. Then lastly, my sister, what's the difference between the Brian Mokgotsi and witness E? Because if Brian Mokgotsi had the WhatsApp calls and the recorded a conversation, all sort of, what's the difference between the two? Because seemingly we are too trusting now this witness E before any credibility by the commission. But while on Brian Mokgotsi, we were just denying everything before it was tested to the commission. Thank you so much, my sister.
Siyabonga, Babsanile. Thank you so much for your thoughts. We also have another caller. This is Chris in Durban. Chris, good evening to you, and what are your thoughts tonight?
Well, firstly, I want to congratulate Newzroom Afrika and the different commissions, whether it's Madlanga or the other one, on putting this thing out to citizenry, as your previous caller mentioned. But you know what? You can actually start connecting the dots in terms of what's actually happening, and you can't, in isolation, just look at some of what the witnesses are doing. I mean, we saw that today, and again, I want to talk about what actually happened with ANC and what actually happened with the counting, voting and the rigging and what have you.
Yeah.
This is no longer about, looking after what we started off in 1994. And by the way, I'm born way before that. So I come from the old age, okay? And I am so depressed on what I'm hearing of how the guys are looking at, people are getting into elections or council getting there to feed their stomachs. And it was said so, and I was listening to a radio station this afternoon as I was driving home from work. So I just hope the citizens are listening to all of this and make informed decisions, whatever that is. But I just want to appreciate, the reason I'm calling, I just want to appreciate you guys for sharing all of this with us. I really do.
It's an absolute pleasure and, of course, a responsibility by us in the media to ensure that we do disseminate this information to the viewers so they are able to make their own informed decisions. We also have Murimedi, who's out in Pretoria. Murimedi, a very good evening to you.
Evening, how are you, Katlego?
I'm good, thanks. What are your thoughts tonight?
Yeah, look, man, I want to first say I appreciate Witness E. I hear him, he's having a very, very, very critical information against the minister. I really want to say witness like Witness E, man, they need serious protection, very serious one. And then the second one is this one, man. I want to hear the commission saying what they are going to do now with the other police on the ground, where, for example, the minister was working, those colleagues there, maybe the place, let's say, for example, we treat it as a crime scene. But for the people who are already contaminated, who have been working with the minister, what about those who were not working with the minister? So just to protect the employees, man, somebody must go and talk to them. Even the Mr. CB, where the CBI was working in the head office here. We need to hear now what are they doing to calm the employees there. Because now it's like the witness who said he had information, but he ended up taking the information to the same people who were going to assassinate that person that was killed. So on the ground level, we're having the same situation. How do we calm down the police on the ground? Because the job that they are doing is very, very, very much also important, and it's very dangerous.
It certainly is.
Yeah, I need that one. It must be. We're focusing on these people, the big people who have been doing these killings. They are the ones who have been doing it, but they've contaminated on the ground there.
Murimedi?
People must be protected.
Most certainly. Thank you so much for your call and giving us your thoughts this evening. Those are some of your calls coming through with regards to your opinions with the Madlanga Commission that sat today. We'll have a quick ad break and then get responses from our guests after this. Welcome back. We're wrapping up the analysis by our professors tonight on that very first sitting of the Madlanga Commission. So, Professor Mofokeng, we heard from a few of our callers some differing views there, especially when it comes to Witness E. Sanele in Mnambiti said that we are putting the cart before the horse in just taking the information that Witness E is giving us. And he says we should look at the potential of the contradiction that already he has given, even comparing him to Brown Mokhotsi, saying there the public did not necessarily take that evidence into consideration in the way that Brown Mokhotsi had put it. But when it comes to Witness E, we are appreciating that, quite the opposite from what Murimedi is saying, that he appreciates Witness E.
Yes, Katlego, well, I followed what he said, but we need to be able to understand that the commissioners ask Witness E if then they can verify what is submitted, if they contacted the service providers, in a case where direct lines were made towards him, by the minister, of which then he gave them a go-ahead. So which means Section 205, then we will be affected so that then they can be able to, as part of, fact-finding missions. But I need to also highlight, in line with what the other caller made, to say, if you listen to witness E, and then in terms of the hardships of which he suffered for not being considered for promotions, and as well as those that are implicated, to be able to look the other way when actually he advised them that, 2 weeks prior to the assassination of this politician, that they are still there except the 2 that obviously took early pension. We see a situation of a culture of blind loyalty, emerging within the South African Police Service, of which he did indicate in terms of his performance that, is someone who rendered 100%, conviction rate. And that particular individual will even be told that he will never be able to see promotion. And he also made those allegations that, the minister promised him that if he cooperates, then he will find rest and peace of mind the rest of his life. What does it mean? It means that those that are polishing the shoes of corrupt leaders, they are well looked after by the system. So we are looking forward for Madlanga Commission really to put to the president that indeed, like what General Kumalo provided, that almost the majority of officials in Gauteng, they are moonlighting, they are working for criminal cartels. So there is a need to cleansing the system as well as to bring sanity as well as credibility within the South African Police Service. Indeed, there are 2 sides of the story. Then we can also listen to the minister when he comes back, to be able to answer to this particular. We are not being carried away, but what the South Africans are tired of, they are tired of lip service, whereby they will always be, given false hopes. And then when actually individuals, they've got other interests. And look at his track record. It can also be verified if then he qualified for promotion as well as performance. And those that were sitting at the panels for promotion, they need to also be asked why this particular individual was not, considered for promotion. Otherwise, then we'll always be emotional to say that, well, these people tell a lie. Of course, he admitted that he told a lie, in situations where he was subjected. We are not saying that whatever he submitted, we can take it as, as a valid information, but it is the responsibility of the commission to go and verify such information and make a recommendation to the president to say the minister is highly compromised, as well as many other senior police officials within the South African Police Service.
Most certainly. Prof. Kotzé, I mean, if we stay with witness E, Murimedi, one of the callers said that he needs serious protection. And we saw there in December with witness D, when he was able to describe some of the events in terms of what happened in his testimony, someone who was present, someone who was there would easily be able to identify and know that witness D was van der Merwe. So in the case of witness E, someone who says, I had these conversations with the minister, and of course I think we need to also explain that with the killing of witness D, it's not certain that this was directly linked to the Madlanga Commission. But if we are saying that we are putting witnesses in protection, and we've got witness E who's describing situations, surely those that he speaks of know who he is, and what does that then do for the protection of his identity?
Yes, I think when it comes to his identity, I think there's a good chance that many people know who he is. His voice is very clear. It's not distorted like what they do in other situations where it's very difficult to identify a person's voice. So although one doesn't see his face, I think those close to him or those that were working with him will immediately identify him. So there's very little protection in that respect. I think where the protection can be is in terms of whether it's maybe outside the country. It's because many of these protection programs provide persons, South Africans, to stay outside the country. We don't know the details, obviously. So I think they've also learned from what happened to Witness D, that they must be much more diligent and careful about the protection of these witnesses. And clearly, because he is or was in crime intelligence, he was in a position where he had access to very important information and delicate information. So there's all the reasons, therefore, to protect him against that. I have to agree also to say that, yes, but he is presenting as evidence is naturally not accepted without being critical about it. And that the Commission must ultimately decide how acceptable this evidence is. Because this is not a court of law, the process of cross-examination is not used in the ordinary way, and therefore it cannot really be tested as for example, in a court of law. But that is why a commission of inquiry does not come to a final decision in which they explicitly come to a conclusion of saying a person is guilty or not guilty. That must still go through a criminal justice judicial process. So I think what the commission is to collect as much possible, as much information as possible, and then to give it through to the prosecutors or to IDAC, like what was formed during the time of the Zondo Commission, in order to process it further. So we can't expect of the Madlanga Commission to come to decisive conclusions about individual witnesses and persons implicated here.
Most certainly. Just to close it off, Prof. Mofokeng, very quickly, just considering the proceedings that we witnessed today, what do you think are the steps that should be taken in order to prioritize the independence and integrity of police investigations in our country?
Well, Katlego, there is a call that, there is a need for democratic mandate, that ministers must be accountable to the voters who elected, them to that particular office. But we need policy oversight where political, ministers should be seen as necessary for providing oversight and ensuring that the police service remains responsible to the public's, broader safety needs. They should not really now and then be caught to be gravitating more to, to service the interests as well as the aspiration of their political parties. We need, where in the future, we need to check whether is it possible that the appointments of ministers should not be linked with, political affiliation. So that is probably a way of eliminating or reducing political interference, because these individuals, as Professor indicated, that they want to survive, and whatever that is happening in their political parties, they overstep their boundaries and forget actually the mandate that they're supposed to follow. So it is very much needed as a proposed reforms, going forward, that there is a requirement, for instructions to be provided to the ministers that when they are appointed, what is it that they can do and not do? Because the discretion, as we have seen with Minister Mchunu, has overlapped. And then where he's trying to justify, his actions to disband the PKTT. So this is probably one of the measures that needs to be looked at going forward.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time in joining us this evening. Professor Dirk Kotzé, political analyst, as well as Professor Jacob Mofokeng, a Unisa Department of Criminology and Security Science. We certainly appreciate your analysis this evening.